Hello there and welcome to this revision video which is going to support your revision on our inquiry question of how did communism and fascism shape the interwar period. Now, one of the things that you have been learning about is how people were controlled in totalitarian dictatorships. Now, a dictatorship is when really one person has almost complete control, and we found out in this inquiry that in 1930s Germany, from 1933, Adolf Hitler became the leader of Germany. The ideology was fascism, and Hitler and his Nazi party had a huge amount of control over people's lives. Similarly, in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, the leader was Joseph Stalin, and we know that the Soviet Union was shaped by the ideology of communism, but there are some remarkable parallels between Germany and the Soviet Union during this time, and in the methods used to control people. Now, our focus is very much on how people are controlled in these dictatorships, but I hasten to add that opposition was very, very difficult in these countries at the time, but of course not impossible, and there are countless examples of heroic people that did stand up to Hitler in Germany or Stalin in the Soviet Union during this time. So opposition wasn't impossible, but of course it was very, very difficult, and in these countries Hitler and Stalin had a huge degree of control over their people, and we're going to think about how they did this. So you're going to be completing a piece of extended writing where you are going to be answering the question: propaganda was the most important reason for why people were controlled in Germany and the Soviet Union in the 1930s. How far do you agree with this view? Now, you, when you're answering this question, you're going to write about propaganda. You can also write about the idea of the police state, the economy, things to do with money, persecution, and then you're going to have a conclusion where you are going to explain what do you think is the most important reason for why people were controlled in Germany and the Soviet Union during this time. And it'd be great in your essays as well if you can sort of focus on some of the similarities and differences between how these things worked in Germany and the Soviet Union. So there's quite a lot to write about, so we're just going to use this video to go through some of the key points and key ideas just to help you as part of your revision. So this was an image that we took a look at. It's an artistic interpretation that helps you understand the different methods of control in Nazi Germany. So you can see somebody being arrested, perhaps by the Gestapo. We can see the sort of use of loudspeakers, delivering speeches. We can see propaganda posters. We can see lots of propaganda flags, for example. We can see people doing the Nazi salute, Heil Hitler salute. So we can see lots of different methods of control within that image, and that's probably quite a good image to sort of reflect on, to think about the wide degree of control that the Nazis had over people in Germany from 1933 until 1939. When you're looking at the idea of propaganda, for the Soviet Union, you might talk about how Stalin was presented as the heir to Lenin. It was often pictured in propaganda alongside an image of Lenin. Remember, we looked at that picture in class where there was almost like a fake photo showing that Stalin and Lenin together. Stalin was often portrayed as a father figure in paintings, and he was always portrayed as a strong and powerful leader in military uniform. In Germany, the Nazis created what was called a cult of Hitler's personality. This was sometimes known as the cult of the Führer. Führer was a name that Hitler gave to himself, and he was often referred to as the Führer in Nazi Germany. The Nazis held rallies. They used radios and films to control people. In fact, every year rallies were held in a town called Nuremberg in Germany around August, September time. Lots of people would gather together to hear speeches by Hitler. Some people in Germany came to love Hitler. They were brainwashed by Nazi propaganda. So in terms of similarity and difference, both create a cult of personality around their leaders. People were sort of almost, a nice word to use is the word indoctrinated to support the leader. The Nazis used lots of technology, including radio and film. The Soviets presented Stalin as the heir to Lenin, so some of the differences there. So we got here some propaganda posters. We can see that idea of creating this image of a strong and powerful leader dressed in military uniform. Also in the Soviet Union, they featured a miner called Alexei Stakhanov, who apparently mined 102 tons of coal in one 5-hour, 45-minute shift. It was 14 times what his quota was, and he was presented as the ideal hardworking Soviet worker. And propaganda encouraged people to be like him. So propaganda, spreading these political messages, was an important method of control in both Germany and the Soviet Union. We also talked about how the Nazis held rallies every year in Nuremberg. This was featured in a propaganda film called Triumph of the Will, directed by filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl. Cheap radios called the People's Receiver were sold so people could listen to Hitler's speeches, and there's a poster advertising the People's Receiver, and there's a poster advertising the Nazi film Triumph of the Will. In fact, 70% of people owned radios by 1939 in Nazi Germany, and those that couldn't afford radios, remember those loudspeakers in the streets, so you couldn't really escape that propaganda in Nazi Germany. Okay, the police state is the idea that there is a secret police that will monitor people and arrest people if they show any kind of opposition. Now, in the Soviet Union, the secret police is called the NKVD, and they arrest anyone who criticizes the communists. People arrested often went on what were called show trials. Stalin used this a lot to put sort of what he regarded as political opponents on trial, which would persuade others not to oppose the government. Now, opponents were sent to work camps that were known as gulags, and they were far away from the main population centers in the Soviet Union in a very cold part of the Soviet Union called Siberia. In Germany, the secret police, the Gestapo, arrested anyone who criticized the Nazis, so similar to the NKVD in the Soviet Union. There was only actually around about 15,000 Gestapo in Nazi Germany, but the impression was that they were everywhere, and people were genuinely fearful. Remember the video that we watched where the Professor Moritz, said, "You have to speak for a flower," and he talked about how somebody once got sent away because they said that the business was going bad. Those arrested could be sent to concentration camps like Dachau, just outside Munich. Conditions in those camps were very dangerous. There was lots of violence, and people could die from disease as well. So in terms of both countries, they both had a secret police. They both used work or concentration camps. The Soviet Union, of course, used show trials to spread fear. There's a source here from the Soviet Union that really sort of focused on that idea of fear. This one here says, from Tamara Yegizarova, says, "It became vastly more difficult to socialize because nobody knew who was informing on them. In the morning when you left your flat, you saw that a flat had been sealed, that those people were no longer there. Of course, your state of mind was utter terror because nobody knew whether they would be arrested. People turned in on themselves." Now, this painting is by Boris Vladimirsky. It's called Black Ravens. Black Ravens were the names of the cars driven by the secret police in the Soviet Union, who were called the NKVD. They would arrest people in the middle of the night and take people away in these cars. In terms of the police state in Germany, this interpretation helps you to understand the fear that people felt living in Nazi Germany. People had to speak through a flower, say only good things about the Nazis. So this story from this history book called The Nazi Seizure of Power by historian W.S. Allen is really interesting to think and to help you think about why the police state is such an important method of control. So it says, Hermann Schulz lost his job at a railway yard because he was a member of the Social Democratic Party, the main socialist party in Germany. His house was searched at least 7 times, and he was questioned by the Gestapo at least 20 times. In the summer of 1933, Schulz was given a job at a stone quarry in return for a promise to give up political activity. In the winter of late 1933, an unknown man knocked at Schulz's door and asked for him by name. Schulz took him in. It was raining and the man was wet. The man described himself as a socialist who was running away from the Gestapo. He asked, did Schulz have any weapons? Could he supply the names of any loyal socialists in the area? Schulz answered no to each question and added, I'm done with all that. All I can do is put you up overnight and feed you, which I'd do for any human being on a night like this. In the morning after breakfast, the man went to the door. Just before he left, turned his coat lapel back and showed Schulz an SS badge. SS was like the Gestapo. Then he left without saying a word. So you can see here just the thoroughness the Nazis had in terms of that police state. That they were prepared to spy on people and check up on people. And of course, this spread fear throughout Nazi Germany. So it's a good story that to illustrate how people are controlled in totalitarian dictatorships. Okay, so the economy is another fact you might want to write about, and the economy is things to do with money. So in the Soviet Union, they brought collectivization to modernize agriculture. Grain was moved from countryside to the cities to feed workers and also to sell abroad. And Stalin industrialized Russia with his 5-year plans. In Germany, the Nazis created work schemes and got rid of unemployment. The Nazis created schemes such as Strength Through Joy in the Volkswagen car scheme to persuade workers to support them. The Nazis focused on unemployment, whereas the Soviet Union focused on modernization. Both forced their economic policies on people. So let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. Okay, so in Germany, the Nazis got rid of unemployment. They often created jobs through work schemes. So they built like new hospitals, new roads, things like that. But the most famous one is they built autobahns, which are motorways across Germany. And they wanted this work to be done by hand so it would create enough jobs for people. So the Nazis got rid of the problem of unemployment. And remember, there were 6 million people unemployed in Germany before the Nazis came to power. So this really helped them to control people because there were some people that were kind of grateful they had a job. Although I hasten to add, these jobs were generally lower paid and people worked longer hours than had done before the Nazis came to power. The Nazis also had their organisation called Strength Through Joy. It provided leisure activities like cruises, hikes and cheap opera and theatre tickets, and workers could even save for a Volkswagen car. Now, in the Soviet Union, Stalin used 5-year plans to industrialize the Soviet Union. He sold off grain to raise money to build factories. New industrial cities like Magnitogorsk made the Soviet Union seem modern and powerful. And you can actually see an image of Magnitogorsk there. It means steel city, basically. Farms in the Soviet Union were collectivized, meaning that everyone had to work together on big farms. It's basically communism in action. This gave the government, however, much more control over life in the countryside. Okay, so the final category is persecution. Now, Stalin created class enemies and blamed the kulaks for problems in the Soviet Union. The term kulak was used to target people who opposed the policies of the Soviet Union, and they were blamed for creating a famine where between 5.7 and 8.7 million people died in the 1930s. Now, in Germany, the Nazis persecuted Jewish people and blamed them for Germany's problems. They passed laws to discriminate against Jewish people called the Nuremberg Laws, and Jewish people are attacked in an event called Kristallnacht, sometimes referred to as the November Pogrom. So both countries blamed specific groups for society's problems. The Soviet Union targeted class enemies, Germany targeted Jewish people, as well as, of course, other groups of people as well. So you can see here, Stalin's speech to the Communist Party in 1929 said, "We must eliminate the kulaks as a class. We must smash the kulaks. We must strike at the kulaks so hard as to prevent them from rising to their feet again. We must annihilate them." Now, there was a huge famine in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, and Stalin blames this on the kulaks, and that's helped him keep control because he avoided the blame for it. The Nazis persecuted Jewish people in the 1930s, and as we've seen there, they passed these laws, the Nuremberg laws, as well as many, many other laws during the 1930s. But they also blamed Jewish people for Germany's problems. They even linked the defeat in the First World War to being the fault of Jewish people as well, which of course is completely false and untrue. Okay, we're just going to look at an example paragraph, and we're going to then think about how it fulfills the things that you want to do when you write in. So this is an example paragraph for agreeing. So we would say, I would agree that propaganda was the most important reason why dictators were able to control their countries. In both Germany and the Soviet Union, propaganda posters portrayed the leaders, Hitler and Stalin, as powerful leaders dressed in military uniform. This meant that people saw the dictators as strong leaders, helping Hitler and Stalin to be able to control people. In the Soviet Union, Stalin was often shown in images with Lenin, the original leader of the Bolsheviks, making him seem more powerful. In Germany, a rally was held each year in Nuremberg, making the Nazis seem more powerful. Both leaders were portrayed as saviors and people capable of solving each country's problems. Therefore, propaganda had the effect of persuading people to support both leaders, enabling them to keep control. In terms of a highlight, this is where you link in back to the question. That's really important. You need to make sure you've got specific knowledge, and then you need to use your historical language. So use those phrases like this meant that, this shows that, this led to, as a result, and these nice historical phrases are going to help you to just really analyze and explain how important is each factor, what's the effect of each factor, how does that help the dictators to control people. Okay, so thanks very much for listening. Hopefully that has helped remind you of some of the key ways in which dictatorships were able to control people in Germany and the Soviet Union in the 1930s. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.